বাংলা মুভি আপলোড করে ওয়াচ টাইম পূরণ করে ইউটিউব চ্যানেল মনিটাইজেশন করা শেখার জন্য জুবায়েদ ভাইয়ের কোর্সে ভর্তি হন এখনই। একদম শুরু থেকে শেষ পর্যন্ত শিখতে পারবেন, সম্পূর্ণ রিস্ক মুক্ত। এমডি জুবায়েদ ভাইয়ের এই কোর্সে আপনি পাবেন সম্পূর্ণ গাইডলাইন, নিরাপদ ও রিস্ক ফ্রি কাজের পদ্ধতি, কন্টেন্ট আইডিয়া, এডিটিং, এসইও এবং গ্রোথ স্ট্র্যাটেজি। ফ্রি একটি ক্লাসও দেওয়া হবে যাতে আপনি নিশ্চিত হতে পারেন যে প্রতিষ্ঠানটি সঠিক এবং প্রশিক্ষণ কার্যকর। তাই আর দেরি কেন, এখনই মেসেজ করুন এবং কোর্সে জয়েন হন। ওয়াচ টাইম পূরণ করে ইউটিউব চ্যানেল মনিটাইজেশন করা শেখার জন্য জুবায়েদ ভাইয়ের কোর্সে ভর্তি হন এখনই। একদম শুরু থেকে শেষ পর্যন্ত শিখতে পারবেন, সম্পূর্ণ রিস্ক মুক্ত। এমডি জুবায়েদ ভাইয়ের এই কোর্সে আপনি পাবেন সম্পূর্ণ গাইডলাইন, নিরাপদ ও রিস্ক ফ্রি কাজের পদ্ধতি, কন্টেন্ট আইডিয়া, এডিটিং, এসইও এবং গ্রোথ স্ট্র্যাটেজি। ফ্রি একটি ক্লাসও দেওয়া হবে যাতে আপনি নিশ্চিত হতে পারেন যে প্রতিষ্ঠানটি সঠিক এবং প্রশিক্ষণ কার্যকর। তাই আর দেরি কেন, এখনই মেসেজ করুন এবং কোর্সে জয়েন হন।
700,000 international migrants arrived in Australia last year. That's roughly the population of Adelaide arriving in 1 year. And if you think that's just a random statistic, I want you to think again, because those 700,000 people need somewhere to live, and most of them are renting. This single factor has become the most powerful driver of Australian rental yields in a decade. And if you're not investing with migration in mind, you're leaving massive money on the table. So stay tuned. Later in this video, I'm going to show you the exact suburbs where migration is creating the highest rental demand, the suburbs where vacancy rates are plummeting, where rents are climbing the fastest, and where investors are capturing incredible returns. And I'm going to break down the data showing which migration streams are creating which rental pressures in different parts of Australia. By the end, you'll see exactly which suburbs are positioned to benefit most from migration trends over the next 5 years. And you'll understand why some investors are deliberately targeting migration-led suburbs while others are completely missing the opportunity. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Aaron, and if you're new here, we break down real property investment data and trends that actually move the needle on rental yields and capital growth in Australia. Now, I want to start with a question. How many of you have noticed that rent prices have gone up significantly in the last 2 or 3 years? Yeah, okay, so probably most of you, right? You've noticed it. Your rents have gone up. Your tenants' rents have gone up. Rental vacancy rates are tight. There's very strong demand and everyone's feeling it. But here's what most people don't realize. The reason for this rent explosion is not what the media is telling you. It's not just interest rates. It's not just supply shortages, although those things do play a role. The real driver, the thing that is actually transforming Australian rental markets right now, is international migration. And I'm not talking about migration in the political sense. I'm talking about it in an economic sense, because migration creates housing demand. Housing demand creates rental demand, and rental demand pushes up yields and creates opportunities for investors who understand how to position themselves. So here's the scale we're talking about. In the last 2 years, Australia has received approximately 1.4 million international migrants. That's not the natural growth of our population. That's on top of our natural growth. It's additional people arriving and needing somewhere to live. And because most of them arrive without existing property wealth, most of them are renting. Think about it for a second. 1.4 million people, most of them renting. That's massive additional demand on rental markets. That's not demand for one suburb or one state. That's demand across major capital cities. That's demand in secondary cities. That's demand in regional areas where universities are growing. Now, here's where this gets really interesting for property investors. Migration doesn't happen uniformly. It doesn't spread evenly across all suburbs. It concentrates in specific areas. Areas with jobs, areas with universities, areas with established migrant communities, areas where there is good public transport. And when migration concentrates, rental demand also concentrates. And when rental demand concentrates, rents rise sharply in those specific suburbs. So if you're investing without understanding migration patterns, you might end up in a suburb that's growing slowly. But if you're investing with migration data in mind, you could end up in a suburb where rents are rising 5, 6, 7% per year, just from migration demand alone. Now, this is what we're going to break down in this video today. I'm going to show you how migration is transforming rental markets. I'm going to show you which suburbs are benefiting the most, and I'm going to give you a framework for identifying migration-driven data opportunities before they become obvious to everyone else. Because right now, migration is one of the biggest untapped advantages in property investing, and most investors have no idea it's happening. So let me set the context for what's happening right now. In 2025, for the last few decades, Australia's migration has been relatively stable. We've got permanent skilled migration through our skilled migration programs. We've got family reunification. We've got international students who stay on after the studies. It's been consistent, but it's been sort of baked into the property market for years. But something shifted in the last couple of years, and it's a significant shift, a really significant shift. From 2020 to 2023, during COVID, international migration was largely shut down. So we had a period of years where very few international migrants were arriving. And during that time, rental markets tightened. Landlords had it good because demand was low, but supply was constrained. Lots of Australians wanted to rent, but there weren't many rentals available. So rents climbed, but not because of migration, but because of supply constraint. But from late 2022 onwards, that changed. Borders reopened, migration numbers started to climb. They climbed, and they climbed, and they climbed. By 2023, we were seeing migration numbers that were the highest on record. And by 2024 and into 2025, those numbers have stayed elevated. Here's the specific numbers I want you to absorb, okay? In the financial year of 2023 and 2024, Australia received approximately 727,000 net overseas migrants. That means international migrants arriving minus those leaving. 727,000 people. That's a record. Not quite, but near record levels, right? And the government's forecast suggests that migration will stay elevated, somewhere in the range of 400 to 600,000 per year for the foreseeable future. Now, add that to Australia's natural population growth of about 1% per year, and you're looking at a total population growth in Australia of around 2 to 2.3% per year. That's substantial, and most of that population is concentrating in capital cities, specifically Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide. Here's why this matters for rental markets. When you've got that level of population growth coming in, and most of it is coming in at ages 25 to 30, these are prime rental ages, your rental demand explodes. You've got young professionals arriving, they need to rent immediately, they can't buy a house because they've just arrived, and they don't have local equity. They might not have local credit history, so they rent. And because they're professionals, they can afford decent rents. They're not searching for the cheapest rent, they're searching for the convenient rental. The rental near their workplace, the rental near public transport, the rental in an area where migrants or students are living. So they concentrate in specific suburbs. And when you've got that level of concentration of rental demand in specific suburbs, rents climb significantly. This is the context for what we are seeing in 2025. We're not just seeing normal population growth. We're seeing the combination of natural population plus the highest migration in records. We're seeing the combination of natural population growth plus the highest migration in decades. And that's creating a rental market environment unlike anything we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. And most investors have no idea this is happening. They're just seeing rents go up and thinking, oh, the market's hot. But they don't understand why. If they understood why, if they understood that it's migration driven, they could position themselves deliberately in high migration suburbs and capture extraordinary yields. Let's talk about how migration actually translates into rental demand, because this is a key mechanism that most investors just don't understand. When a migrant arrives in Australia, let's say they're a software engineer from India, or a nurse from the Philippines, or an accountant from the UK, their first housing decision is almost always to rent. They might arrive, They might find a job within 2 weeks. They need housing immediately. They don't have time to save for a deposit. They don't have local property knowledge, so they rent. Now, where do they rent? Do they spread themselves evenly across all suburbs? No, they concentrate. They concentrate around their workplace, around universities, around established communities, and around public transport. Let me give you some specific examples because this is where the data gets really interesting. So take Sydney, for example. International migrants in Sydney are concentrating in suburbs with good public transport links to job-heavy areas. So suburbs like Parramatta, Kogarah, Crows Nest, Marrickville, these suburbs have train stations. They have job clusters, tech companies, financial services. They have established migrant communities. So migrants arriving in Sydney are overrepresented in these suburbs compared to their population share. Same thing in Melbourne. Migrants are concentrating in suburbs like Southbank, Carlton, Brunswick, Coburg, areas with universities, areas with public transport, areas with established communities, not spreading evenly across Melbourne. They are concentrating. Brisbane is slightly different though, because it's a younger migration destination, but the same pattern applies. Migrants are concentrating in areas around the CBD, around universities like University of Queensland and QUT, around areas with good transport. So suburbs like Fortitude Valley, Southbank, Paddington, Brisbane mean they're seeing higher migration settlements. Now, here's where this gets powerful for understanding rental yields. When you've got high migration settlement in specific suburbs, you've got higher rental demand in those specific suburbs. And when you've got higher rental demand, you've got 3 immediate effects. First, the vacancy rates drop. Landlords can fill properties much faster. They don't have to negotiate as hard. Turnover happens really quickly. Second, rents increase because the supply is fixed. There's only so many rentals in any given suburb at any given year. But demand is increasing, so prices rise. Landlords can ask for more because tenants are competing for properties. And third, property values increase because investors can see that rents are rising in these specific suburbs, so they want to invest there. And when investor demand increases, property values increase. So let me give you the numbers, right? In suburbs like Marrickville in Sydney, which has seen significant migrant settlement, rents have climbed from about $320 per week in 2019 to approximately $480 per week in 2025. That's a 49% increase in rent over 6 years. That's extraordinary capital growth in terms of rental yield. Compare that to some outer suburbs that haven't seen as much migration, where rents have climbed from, say, $240 to about $310. That's a 29% increase. Same city, same market cycle, but migration-driven suburbs are outperforming by 20% in rental growth. That's the power of localized migration-driven rental booms. Now, migration doesn't just create adult worker rental demand. It also creates a massive student rental market. And this is a huge component of migration-driven rental booms that most investors actually completely miss. So here's the scale. Australia's international student population is approximately 1 million people. That's enormous, 1 million people. And about 80% of those international students are renting. Think about that. 800,000 international students. Almost all of them are renting. Now, where are they renting? Obviously, universities. They're renting around universities. Specifically, they're renting within 5 to 10 kilometer radius of major universities. So in Queensland, they're renting around UNSW, around UTS, around Macquarie. In Melbourne, they're renting around Melbourne University, around Monash, around RMIT. In Brisbane, around UQ. And here's what's happening to suburbs around universities. They've transformed. Suburbs like Darlington, near UNSW in Sydney, that suburb now has massive rental demand from university students. Rents have climbed, vacancy rates are near zero, and investor yields have gone through the roof. Same thing with suburbs like Parkville in Melbourne, near Melbourne University. Parkville is now one of the highest yielding inner suburbs in Melbourne, almost entirely because of student rental demand driven by international students. And here's the thing. This student rental demand is just increasing. It's not decreasing. The Australian government has been actively encouraging international student enrolments. Universities have been expanding their international student recruitment. So The number of international students coming to Australia has been growing year on year on year. In 2019, we had about 900,000 international students. By 2024, we had approximately 1 million. And forecasts suggest that it'll be continuing to grow for years to come. So suburbs around universities are going to see even more rental demand. Now, student rentals are different from worker rentals. They typically turn over every year. So students finish their course, they leave, or they move houses. So vacancy rates can spike in January and February when students leave for the summer, but they fill up again in February and March when the academic year starts. This creates an opportunity for investors who understand student rental markets. You can target properties that specifically appeal to students. You can manage high turnover. You can time your pricing. You can build relationships with university accommodation officers or student housing providers. This is actually a specialist investment niche, and it's driven by international student migration. Now, most investors think about migration in terms of capital cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, but here's actually what's happening. Migration is also settling in secondary cities and regional areas. And the rental market opportunities there are even more pronounced than in big cities. Geelong, Ballarat, and the Sunshine Coast are all seeing migration inflows. Wollongong is seeing substantial migration settlement. These are secondary cities where international migrants are choosing to settle because housing is more affordable than in Sydney or Melbourne. And because there are jobs, Geelong has manufacturing and healthcare. Wollongong has similar. Sunshine Coast has tourism and professional services. So when migrants choose to settle in these secondary cities, they create significant rental demand pressure in relatively small markets. A market like Geelong might have 5,000 rentals across the entire city. If you suddenly get an additional 2,000 migrant renters, which is a realistic number given the recent trends, you've increased the rental demand by 40%. In a market that small, that's transformational. And here's what I want you to understand. Secondary city rental markets are much more transparent to individual investors than capital city markets. You can actually understand them. You can actually see migration trends. You can see suburb growth. You can see whether the fundamentals are there. For example, I've been tracking migration trends to Wollongong for years now. Wollongong has a population of about 370,000. In the last 3 years, I've seen net migration growth of approximately 6,000 people per year into Wollongong. That's a 2% annual population growth purely from migration, on top of natural growth. And rental demand there has been extraordinary. Rents have climbed, vacancy rates have tightened, and yields have improved. Same thing with Geelong. Geelong is seeing annual migration growth of about 5,000 people. Rents have climbed significantly. Vacancy rates are tight, yields are improving. For investors who understand this, secondary cities represent enormous opportunities because you're not competing with the sophisticated data-driven investors who are all focused around Sydney and Melbourne. You're competing with a small pool of investors who understand regional markets. And if you position yourself in a secondary city that's experiencing strong migration inflow, you can capture significant rental growth over 5 to 10 years. Now, here's something most investors never think about. The composition of migration actually matters for rental market outcomes. Not all migrants create the same rental demand. Australia's migration is skewed towards skilled professionals. About 60% of our permanent migration program is skilled migration. These are engineers, accountants, healthcare professionals, IT specialists. These are people who earn higher incomes. They can afford premium rents. They can drive higher end rental markets. But we also have working holiday makers, young people on visas who are working casually and renting. We have international students who we talked about. We have family reunification migrants who vary in income level. And we have refugee settlements, which creates demand in more affordable rental markets. Here's why this matters. If a suburb is receiving lots of skilled migration, let's say software engineers working in tech hubs, you'll see strong demand for quality rental housing in that suburb. Rents will be higher, tenants will be more stable, returns will be good, but competition from other investors will be fierce. But if a suburb is receiving more diverse migration, including working holiday makers, younger students, family reunification, migrants of mixed income levels, you'll see demand across a broader range of rental prices. The cheapest rentals might see strong demand. Mid-range rentals might see very strong demand. You've got more flexibility here. So let me give you an example. In suburbs like Pyrmont and Sydney, which is a tech hub, you're seeing primarily skilled, high-income migrants. Those people are renting apartments in the $300 to $400 per week range. Premium stuff. So investor yields are okay because you're getting higher rents, but you're also paying higher purchase prices for that property. But in suburbs like Greenacre in Western Sydney, you're seeing a more diverse migration. You've got skilled professionals, but you've also got families. You've got working holidaymakers and younger people moving in. So there's demand across a broader rental range. And because purchase prices for property are lower, your yields can actually be stronger. So understanding migration composition helps you identify where your best investment opportunities actually are. You might assume high migration yields equals higher yield, but actually migration composition is what will determine the yield itself. Now, I said earlier that I'd show you which suburbs are positioned to benefit most from migration trends over the next 5 years. This is the foreshadowing payoff. So let me be specific. The Australian government is forecasting that migration will remain elevated between 400 and 600,000 per year over the next 5 years. That's the official forecast. Now, whether that stays true depends on political and economic factors, but let's assume that it does. If that happens, here's what I expect to see. First, continued concentration into the capital city hubs. So Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth will continue to receive the majority of migrants. So suburbs in those cities are positioned to receive migrants, will continue to see demand growth. Second, I expect to see acceleration of secondary city migration, particularly Geelong, Wollongong, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Canberra. Why? Because capital city rents are becoming unaffordable for some migrants. So secondary cities that offer jobs plus more affordable housing are becoming much more attractive. And that means rental demand in secondary cities is going to accelerate. Third, I expect to see continued strong demand around university hubs, around suburbs which have universities, right? International student numbers are forecast to keep growing. So suburbs like Darlington, Parkville, Southbank, they're going to see continued rental demand from students. Let me give you my specific suburbs to watch. In Sydney, Marrickville, Kogarah, Hurlston, Park. These are seeing strong migration, affordable pricing relative to Sydney, and good rental yields. I expect rents to climb another 15 to 20% over the next 5 years, just from migration demand. In Melbourne, Brunswick, Coburg, Broadmeadows, similar story. Migration is flowing in, but these suburbs are still relatively affordable, and rental yields are already strong. I expect similar growth. In Brisbane, Kangaroo Point, Southbank, New Farm, these are university adjacent with strong migration settlements. I expect these to see rents climb steadily. And in secondary suburbs, Wollongong, suburbs like Corrimal and Shell Harbour, Geelong, suburbs like Newtown, these are where I'm seeing the strongest fundamentals. Population growth from migration, jobs growth, and relatively affordable housing. But here's the critical bit. These suburbs won't stay affordable. As rental yields become obvious, as investors pile in, as prices climb, the opportunity starts to close. So if you're looking at migration-driven suburbs, you want to be looking now, not in 2 years, not when the cash flow is there, right, when everyone else can see it, now. This is the 5-year outlook. Migration is going to remain the dominant driver of rental demand in Australian cities. And if you understand where migration is settling, you can position yourself ahead of where yields are going to be strongest. Now, I need you to acknowledge something. Migration policy can change. It's a political decision. If governments decide to restrict migration, these projections could shift. I'm basing this analysis on current settings and current forecasts, but investors need to understand that political risks exist. Also, migration-driven rental demand is powerful, but it's not the only factor affecting rental markets. Supply also matters. If new rental housing is built in high migration suburbs, that increases supply and moderates rental growth. So don't assume migration automatically equals unlimited rental growth. The best opportunities are when migration is strong and new supply is limited. Now, with those caveats, understanding migration is genuinely one of the most underutilized tools in Australian property investing. Most investors aren't tracking it. Most aren't positioning deliberately. This is an advantage you can use right now. Okay, so if this video has made you think differently about migration as a rental market driver, that's exactly what I wanted. Because migration is one of those things that's happening whether you're paying attention or not. But if you understand it, you can use it. Before you go, if you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button, because when you do, it tells the algorithm that this content is worth showing to other Australian investors who want to understand market drivers instead of just guessing. Second, drop a comment below. Tell me, which suburbs do you think are going to see the strongest migration-driven rental growth in your city? Or if you've already invested in a migration hot suburb, tell me your results. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious where you're seeing the strongest rental demand from migration. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now, because we release content every week breaking down actual market data, trends, and opportunities that move the needle on rental yields and capital growth. Not hype, not theory, real data, real patterns, real outcome. Now, here's the thing. Understanding that migration drives rental markets is one thing. Actually identifying which suburbs are positioned for migration-driven growth is another, because you need to know the data. You need to understand where migration is settling. You need to project where it's likely to settle next. You need to understand job growth, university expansion, transportation infrastructure. These aren't simple decisions. That's exactly why we work with investors who want to build rental portfolios positioned for demographic trends. We identify suburbs where migration is creating genuine rental opportunities. We show you which suburbs are likely to see the strongest rental growth. We help you to position your portfolio ahead of where the data suggests the strongest demand will be. If you're interested in having that kind of strategic analysis for your market or for targeting a specific investment suburb, book a call with our team. The link is in our description below. And thank you for watching.